Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast, and I have never been to a professional basketball game, I just realized. So we should change that. Anybody want to go see a Pacers game? All right, I guess we'll have to wait till next year, won't we? Anyway, let's get into today's interview.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to interviewing world-class photographers to ask them the questions you want answered. Whether you want to be the world's best wedding photographer, family photographer, pet photographer, or you just want to take better photos of your kids growing up, we will get you to start taking better photos today. Here with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodgers fan, and award-winning Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Hey everybody, it is Raymond. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Today's interview is a massive one, and if you follow me on Instagram stories, you might have already got a behind-the-scenes look with today's guest, with Ryan Schembri, which I know that you are going to get a ton of information out of. My head still kind of hurts with everything that he shared, in a good way though, in a good way. So you don't have to pull over, buy some ibuprofen or something like that. This is really one that is going to get your brain turning in the way that he describes his job, what he does, and in such a simple way sometimes of how you can do the same thing. So I'm really excited to get into this interview. But first, guess what? It is time for a shout out. This week's shout out is, am I calling these shout outs or are they just reviews? Well, this review is a shout out on my part. This review, I don't have sponsors on this podcast, right? Maybe it's just because I wasn't born with a TiVo, obviously, but it's just like my generation has already kind of like skipped ads through TV, and it's like I don't want to bring that into my podcast. But I do want more recognition through iTunes for the podcast, and the best way to do that is through a review. If you're getting information or value out of this podcast, the best thing that you can do to help keep this ship afloat, as Adam Carolla would say, it's through an honest review on whatever podcast platform that you are listening to this on. Whether actually Google Play doesn't allow you to leave reviews, which is very strange. Google is very heavy on the importance of reviews. But I believe Stitcher, Pocket Cast, but the biggest one, hands down, like with no contest, is iTunes. And this week we got a new review that I cannot wait to share with you guys. It is from iTunes user MCK2820. Okay. Sorry, I don't know who this, if you're listening to this right now, if it's Michael, if it's Mac, whatever it is, if it's MCK, whatever it is, let me know. I'd love to give you a proper thank you. But the review says the podcast is full of interviews with professional photographers from all fields of photography, and I love listening to it. I learned so much from hearing other photographer stories and experiences. The interviews are engaging, they're insightful, and they're inspiring. I recommend this podcast to anyone who is interested in photography. That's it. What a great interview. Short, sweet, to the point. And by interview, I mean review. Short, sweet, to the point, that reviews don't have to be, paragraphs and paragraphs like I've read in the past to you. I'm talking to you, Jesse. However, I do totally appreciate those. Any sort of review really helps out the podcast. And if you are enjoying what you're listening to, I cannot tell you how grateful I would be if you just took 2 minutes of your time and let me know that I'm on the right track, delivering the right content for you, and that you're just enjoying listening to photographers talking about photography. That's it. That's all I'm trying to do here. So that's it. Again, iTunes is the best place to do that, but if you did so in whatever platform you listen to, again, I cannot tell you how grateful I would be for your review. Okay, we're going to get into today's interview right now, like I said, with Ryan Schembri. He is another world-class photographer. This whole month, man, we have had like serious heavy hitters, and I still am like pinching myself because I cannot believe that just like 4 years ago, I could only dream about like meeting with these photographers, talking with these photographers, hearing their ideas about photography. And here I am, not only talking to them about this, but being able to like they are asking me to record these interviews to then share with you. And that is just so exciting for me. And nobody's holding anything back. You know what I mean? That is what is so great about this, is that it feels very open. It feels very honest. Nobody's like, oh, actually, I got some secrets about photography that I can't tell you. I mean, these photographers are world class. And here they are open about everything. And that is the right mindset. These are the photographers who I want to talk to so that they can pass on their skills, their knowledge, and information to you, the listeners of the podcast. And if you don't get anything out of these podcasts that you're listening to, well, then you're doing it wrong. And you just need to unsubscribe right now, because if you're not getting anything out of these podcasts, then I can't help you in the future. There's nothing more that I could do for you to fully understand the life experiences that these photographers are bringing to you. You just have to go out and learn it on your own, apparently. But if you are getting great value and information out of these podcasts, then this is going to be one that you're truly going to enjoy. So I'm not going to say any more. We're just going to go ahead and get on into that with today's world-class photographer, Ryan Schembri. Today's guest is the youngest recipient of the Australian Institute of Professional Photography's Master Photographer title. He's a Canon ambassador, a wedding and portrait photographer who has shot all around the world, and he is also an educator and advocate for fellow photographers to help them grow their skills and knowledge about the world of photography. So today I'm talking to Ryan Schembri. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure. So great to be here. So can't wait to get into it.
I'm really excited to be talking to you. Obviously, you've been in the industry for a long time. You're a very knowledgeable guy. Looking on your website, it says that you shot your first wedding at 15. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when did you even get your start in photography?
Well, my father was a photographer. One of probably the world's best wedding photographers in his time. And it grew out of, I guess, just curiosity of what my dad did on weekends where he would disappear to. So I think I was 11 or 12 when I first went out and started carrying dad's bags, and at that stage, all the equipment was very heavy as well. It was all medium format cameras.
Sure.
And I remember he had this steel case that it all went into as well. So not only was the equipment heavy, the case was heavy, and he'd make his 12-year-old son walk around with his case all day. So it was a couple of years of doing that, a couple of years of just following him around, and until then he thought I had enough knowledge in terms of going out and shooting my own wedding, and it all started then. It all happened from there. So.
Man, if at 11 or 12 I had to be carrying around these giant cases, I probably wouldn't be too excited about getting into the family business. So what was it that kind of sparked your interest in the photography side of it?
Well, I guess, look, I've got everything I do now. I have Dad to thank for. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore, and I fondly remember the times we had together when he was, I guess, nurturing my curiosity, and that's really what all he did is really just give me the greatest upbringing and understanding of light. For 2 years, Dad would make me walk around with these big cameras, but never let me touch one. Mm-hmm. Because film was expensive. Sure. And developing film was expensive. And so Dad's excuse for that was, well, unless you can read light and you can tell me where the best light is to photograph and you can read exposure, you're not going to waste my money. And so it was 2 years of that, 2 years of walking around and reading light, and until he finally gave me a camera. And it was one of his old crappy ones. It wasn't even one that he used all the time. And finally, taking, I guess, I remember exposing my first roll of film at a wedding. And it was nerve-wracking. It was really, really nerve-wracking. Just that whole process of not knowing, not understanding, okay, well, I've taken it, but is it okay? What's it going to look like? And I kind of miss those days, but I kind of don't. I'm thankful for them. I'm grateful for that upbringing that I had. But for the world that we live in now, I mean, we just live in the most amazing time of our life right now in terms of just having everything available to us. But I still think that upbringing of just understanding of light first and foremost was the greatest gift my dad gave me.
Yeah, I kind of share a similar story. Like I mentioned earlier, I went to film school, and the thesis that I shot was shot on film, and we had shot the whole thesis, and there was actually like named talent in it, so I was extra nervous. Never shot this much film before, and then the production ran out of budget. We didn't have the money to develop the film, and I remember waking up one night, sweating, having nightmares that the film just didn't expose correctly, and that everything was just black, and it was going to be a wreck. But everything turned out to be fine in the end. So
That's good.
that's
Usually,
hilarious.
and you know what it usually did. It's amazing what we used to put ourselves through.
I know, it's so crazy, and we feel like film is so hard to shoot on, and yet I don't know. Some people think that it's much easier to shoot on than digital, but I'm kind of interested in, obviously, since your dad was a predominant wedding photographer, you were around lots of wedding photography growing up. Is there something that you've noticed a big shift in the world of wedding photography since his time and now you shooting?
Yeah, I guess I've noticed a couple of shifts in terms of, well, for better and good, and then for worse in the industry.
There's going to be both, of course.
There has to be both. There's got to be balance on both ends. I think the creativity is probably the biggest thing that I've noticed over the last 10 years, especially, and what people are bringing into the world of wedding photography now with creative, thought-provoking imagery is amazing. I love it. I love seeing it. I judge quite a few competitions, and I love when I get to judge prints like that. What it's also done is brought in a world, though, that has probably lost the essence for me of what it takes to be a really great wedding photographer, especially, and that's balance of coverage, balance of style, balance of what we produce, and people tend to lean very heavily to one style or another, whereas I'm just a huge believer that it needs to be balanced in order to give our clients the best coverage possible. So,
can you kind of elaborate a little more on that? Are you talking about we need to be more diverse in our style of photography?
Totally. Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going. Is I see the greatest wedding photographers in the world can be all. If you had to put words or descriptions around photography and what that photographer did and what that photographer did, a wedding photographer has to be everything. So we arrive in the morning, and we need to be the best product photographers in the world, because essentially we're shooting details. We're shooting all those things that that bride or that groom has gotten for that day, and they've put so much time, money, and effort into, and we need to show that. Then we need to be the best photojournalists in the world, because there's a story evolving around all that as well. And then we need to be the best family portrait photographers in the world, and then we need to be the best fashion photographers in the world, because usually my brides wear very elaborate, very expensive gowns. We then get to a reception venue, and our first job when we get to the reception venue, if you think about it, is to be an architectural photographer. And so the list goes on and on and on. And so it's the balance across all of that. And that's what I really respect about the great wedding photographers out there who do that and do that incredibly, is that, to me, it's the hardest facet of photography that there is. It's the hardest genre just because of that alone. Let alone the fact that it only happens once and you have time constraints around everything happening. Sure. There's no going back and doing it tomorrow if it stuffs up. So
that'd be quite a wedding if there was. Yeah, suddenly I'm feeling very underpaid for my services when we list all the types of photography.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's often what I say to photographers who think that getting into weddings would be easy money.
Right.
I would say to them, well, you've picked the wrong genre.
Yeah, or you've never shot a wedding before.
yeah, either one. It's what I love about it. So.
Of course. You talked there a little bit about developing the story of the wedding day, being a photojournalist, right? I know that you're big on story. Telling the story of a wedding day is very important, and it takes multiple facets of photography. Like you mentioned, the product photography, architecture, fashion, photojournalism. When you show up to a wedding day and it's your job to tell the story, how do you determine what that story is and how to tell it? I
guess a lot of it's about listening. A lot of it's about getting as much pre-information as possible out of the client, and just talking about not only the wedding day itself, but just their relationships and what relationships they have with family members and things like that. And it's funny, when you ask really good questions of people, you get really good answers.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just about not talking. I say to everyone, I don't talk about me, because what I do as a photographer is irrelevant.
Right.
I need to know the story. I need to know where the relationships are going to develop. My other thing, though, to that, because people often look at my work and say, wow, you're lucky. You're lucky that these stories, these moments just happen in front of you. And you're lucky enough just to click the camera. And so what I would say to those people is that most of the images that you see that appear very natural and very candid and all the rest of it are probably in some way, shape or form directed or prompted by myself to happen in a certain area or a certain light, or just developing the story with them. So it's not my story. It's not me saying this is the way I want it to be, but it's helping. And if I was one of those photographers that was a pure photojournalist, and because I know quite a few pure photojournalists, and they don't agree with me. They just think that I should sit in a corner, in a dark hole and hide like and just sniper my way through the day. I would say to them that moments are meant to be created. Moments, like if a moment isn't happening, create it. I read a great quote from Tony Robbins recently that great moments in life are meant to be created. And I took that into my world as well.
Quite literally.
Yeah, quite literally. I will create moments that are for them, are their story, are part of their day. And if I'm getting creative, if I'm doing something that I've had an idea from, I'll always just try and get as much information out as the client. How does it tie back to them? How does it, in some way, shape or form, make them feel warm and fuzzy as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you kind of mentioned that earlier, that you want to get as much information from them, and then that asking a great question will get you a great answer. So do you have any examples of questions that you ask that specifically tell the side of the story that you're looking for?
Yeah, I haven't got a script for it.
Sure.
It's more a conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a couple of things that open up conversation between people, and one of which is just be genuine, just like actually having an interest
Sure.
in who you're speaking to. One of the things that I often open with, like in a lot of my conversations, is just to get an idea of where their mindset is, of what they're looking for, is very simply to ask them, what got you interested in my work? And that will often tell me or lead me down into a conversation that opens up about them at the end of the day. So it's hard. It's a hard one, but I think just asking about, they chose a particular venue. So why did you choose that particular venue? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Or which, often there'll be a story revolved around some part or facet of the wedding that you can elaborate on. So like I say, why would you choose that venue? Why did you choose that church? Tell me about it. Tell me about, did you go to school there? Is that your local parish? Like,
right.
Give me that information. So,
okay. That makes sense. I could see how that would predicate a bunch of different photos that could come out of that, especially if it was the local church that they grew up in and they have a lot of memories there. So I kind of want to know, obviously, a story is told by, in essence, you, the photographer. But like when we're talking about writing, a story is created 100%. Whereas with us, we show up to weddings and things do unfold naturally in front of our eyes and our cameras. So how much of the photos that you take at a wedding would you say are reactive versus proactive, going out and trying to create images?
I'd probably say it's around, I'd a guess 20 to 25% of images are reactive in what I've taken. The rest of it would be would be the other way around. The rest of it is me creating something. And it's not literally creating the look or creating the emotion or whatever it may be. In some ways, it's just, hey guys, I'd love for you to be in this area because the light's really good. And then allowing them just to give me something back that is them, that's natural. So just giving them a moment, even just to be by themselves or to just be chatting about the day. But as long as I put that in the best light possible, then for me, it's still me creating that little moment, because it's still me, placing them in that light and in that position or whatever it may be. But what they bring back to the table is their emotion, their feeling. And I often say to people, look, if you were to look back at one of your images and you can hear me through the image, then it's not a great shot.
Ah, okay. So what do you do to bring up that emotion?
Yeah, and what I say to them is that what I mean by that is that if I placed you in that light, placed you in that position, and then told you to laugh, would you remember the laugh or remember me saying laugh now?
Right. Okay.
And so they would say, well, Ryan, we'd probably remember you saying laugh now. I said, okay, so if I placed you in that light, placed you in that position, but then gave you the excuse to be laughing, would it be better? So if I said to the groom, hey mate, what I want you to do is I want you to find that sweet spot for me, find that tickle spot, and go hard.
Yeah.
And so he'll physically do the motion of that, and she'll give me back her natural reaction from what that is.
Of course, I love it.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense.
Cool.
We talked a little bit there about placing couples in good light, and
if you went through the traditional methods of being taught lighting, you were probably taught how to find the light and not look at the shadow. So, but the shadow is the easiest thing to look for, because sometimes when light isn't ideal, it's very flat, meaning that we can't see direction of light. So as soon as we can see shadow, we understand where the light is, what direction, what intensity, what, how far away it is. Like that, it gives us every clue. It's like people don't often understand, is the light harsher or the light softer in wintertime? So is the light harsher or softer in wintertime?
Well, at least here in the northern hemisphere, I'd say that it's much harsher.
Same. It's the same. It's the same sun. We don't have two of them.
Right. No. But at least here with the snow and the. Okay. All right. You got me there. Go ahead.
So often people say it would be softer, and my answer to that, it was the complete opposite, because what happens is when the sun is further away from the earth, and when a light source goes further away from a subject, at the same intensity of light becomes harsher. So you just need to understand where, like, how far, what distance, what angle. And this all comes from study of not photography. It comes from study of art. And if you look at the great portrait artists of the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, their detail when it came to shadow was impeccable.
Right.
And it's what gave dimension. It's what gave the dimension and the depth to a two-dimensional medium.
Do you have any preferred artists that the listeners can go out and do their research on?
Yeah, there's two that come to mind straight away that I get constant inspiration from. One of which is Caravaggio, who's an Italian master Renaissance painter, and the other is Johannes Vermeer.
Oh, okay.
And Vermeer is one of the Dutch masters. And just to look at the way they painted not only shadow but highlights and the shift. So what a lot of people don't understand is that the shift between highlight and shadow is what creates depth. So mid-tone is our enemy. If you really think about it, mid-tone is the absolute enemy of any photographer, because all of mid-tone does is flatten. It makes things flat and then loses the depth. So if I can guarantee, if Caravaggio was still with us, he would not be loving HDR.
You don't say. Yeah, that's.
I think I can see Caravaggio turning in his grave somewhere, like for a HDR picture. So, So I'm a big fan of give me strong highlights, give me strong shadows, because that's, for me, that's beautiful light.
Right. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I want to talk a little bit about shooting philosophy because that's another thing that it kind of gets tied back to style, I guess, is if you have a philosophy when you go up to shoot, and it doesn't matter what, obviously a wedding, portraits, newborns, landscapes, if you have some sort of internal constitution about how you want to tell your story of this world, you're going to be able to take a more coherent photo. Can you talk about, like, for those starting out, how they can cultivate a philosophy of their own?
It's a really interesting question.
You said if you ask good questions, I'll get good answers. So here we go. I'm excited for this.
Very, very much. How do you cultivate it is probably the part I'm a little bit stuck on. I think anyone who's starting out right now needs to do one thing, and probably one thing only, is to stop photographing.
To stop photographing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm excited to hear where this is going.
So, yeah, and it's funny because I in thinking about it, I've spoken about this before. It's my belief of most people don't understand what they're photographing. Mm-hmm. They photograph for the sake of photograph, and they have no thought process behind it. So, and what do I mean by that? The thought process could be one of many things. It's not just what does the viewer get from this image, or what does this image make me feel. Mm-hmm. That could be one thing, but for me it can be much more simple than that. Is that, do you understand light? Do you understand great exposure? Do you understand great composition? And for me, photography has rules. So if we don't have a great understanding of rules, then how do we apply ourselves? How do we tell that story? How do we make a viewer feel something? It's impossible. And the reason I say that is because often in photography, in the world of photography education especially, we're taught rules are meant to be
broken. Yeah.
And it's the response that comes back all the time, right? Is that rules are meant to be broken. I would say to you, no, rules are actually meant to be followed. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it in life, rules are meant to be followed. If you want to be healthy, do you choose an apple or a muffin?
An apple.
There you go. If you're thirsty, do you choose water or coffee?
Water. When did the tables turn of the host versus the person being questioned? I'm just
so. I would say rules are meant to be followed, just in life, let alone photography. So learn the rules, respect them. That will enable you to push that part of the brain aside, because that's certainly one side of the brain.
Sure.
Push that side of the brain aside, and you've got that nailed. So then creativity and emotion and feeling and all that sort of thing will flow. In order to do that, for me, put down the camera. Put down the camera and start appreciating just looking at light, just looking at how it falls, or learning about how do I expose this? What am I going to expose to? How am I going to get to it? So for me, put down the camera is going to allow you just to look at things wide open to start with. I feel a lot of people get caught up through looking through a viewfinder, or even worse now, they get caught up looking through or looking at the back of a screen.
Right.
It just feels like less of a connection to anything. But I would say put down the camera, start just having a thought process to begin with, whatever it may be. If you don't agree with me in terms of photography has rules, then so be it. I wish you luck. But for me, follow the rules, learn them, and so that opens the mind to create.
I get what you're saying. It's not. First of all, you're not saying put away the camera forever. You're saying don't look at the world through the camera. Look at the camera through your eye, or look at the world through your eyes first. Determine what it is that you want, and then pull up the camera. Is that correct? Okay. Totally. And then the second thing is, I agree with you. I feel like a lot of people lean on rules are meant to be broken almost as a crutch, as an excuse to not properly learn photography. And I guess while there's some merit to being able to bend the rules a little bit, you do need to have that solid foundation. So that's a great tip right there. You mentioned earlier that you are a judge of several photography competitions. Is there something that stands out to you every time you see it as amateur when you're judging these competitions?
Exposure.
Exposure. Okay. Where would you say it mostly leans? Either over or under?
Under. Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Because most people don't understand linear exposure. So
okay. So you think that it's purely just something that they're unaware of and not like a intentional choice.
No, I just think there's probably just a lack of education around it. We went through, for those of you who probably didn't go from the shift of film to digital, it was a huge shift because in digital we had film latitude, which gave us so much to play with. It was ridiculous. And we went to a linear world, and linear can't be broken. Linear can't be bent. And just most people have just a lack of understanding of how photons hit a CCD, or how light enters and then fills up CCDs. And just to give you a really quick overview of it, not to confuse you or anything, light will fill up a CCD from the brightest parts to the darkest parts. So we have more latitude on a highlight than we do on a shadow. And I just see most people underexpose and try to bring it up, and then we leave ourselves with what's more commonly known as noise, or some people try to add film grain,
right.
Which isn't really film grain at all. It's just a lack of information available to the file. And so if you start to expose optimally for the image that you're taking, you'll find that noise is not an issue pretty well at any ISO. And I shoot a lot of my wedding images at 16, 32, 6400 ISO,
right.
Without the presence of noise, because I'm optimally exposing for what I'm shooting.
Right. Not trying to capture a lot of shadow detail at higher ISOs.
Yeah.
Okay. When it comes to obviously like exposure, like you just said, you hear oftentimes always exposed for the face. You hear exposed for the dress. You hear exposed for the background. Do you have it like it's kind of all over the place? You're big on rules. Do you have any rules for? Or I don't want to say quick and fast because they're not always gonna work for every situation. But when it comes to weddings or portraits, photographing people, do you have any quick tips on proper exposure?
Yeah. So I guess for me, optimal exposure is always exposing to the highlight. Mm-hmm. And then if you say to me that if you're exposed to the highlight and then the face is underexposed, I would say to you that you've got your lighting wrong.
Okay. So just in that case, move the subject? Move
the subject or move the light. And if you can't, move light. If we're, shooting with natural light, and I'm yet to work out a way of moving the sun, but I'm working on that.
Oh, tell me about that when that happens. I can't wait.
I'm not that powerful yet. But if we can't move the light, we move the subject. And if you think about it just very quickly, is that the first point of contact with the light will be the brightest point. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the first point of contact with light will be the brightest point. So if I have something here and something here, which is the brighter one?
It's the one closest to the window, I'm assuming.
There you go. So if my subject's dress is first and her face is second, the dress is still going to be the brightest point. So I need to do that in order to expose here and have shadow appearing down here. So for me, exposure revolves entirely around three things: not only the light, but then pose and direction. So pose and direction, where we go with that. So really, it's a combination of all those three things that make optimal exposure.
I love it. This is pretty much my last question. I know that you've been very gracious with your time. Is there anything that you hear being taught to new photographers that is either just complete wrong information, or perhaps it's not entirely wrong, it's just incomplete?
Raymond, we haven't got that much time. So,
Gee, does that mean that there's a lot of misinformation out there?
look, I couldn't say there's. I hear. I can only give you what I hear.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say I'm very active in like searching out information like
Of
that.
course.
But I have, a few people that come to me and have some ideas of maybe what they've been taught in the past, and when we flip those ideas around and we sort of start thinking about it in an optimal way, it exposes a few flaws maybe in the way it's been taught. I probably would say, just to keep myself really safe right now, is I would probably say it's probably more the way things are taught rather than the information being wrong. I tend to see a lot of things being overcomplicated. If you think about it, photography is pretty simple. What do we do? Photography, what we do in photography is written in the word photography, because photography is a Greek word, two Greek words, in fact. It's photo, which is light, and graphy, which is draw. Mm-hmm. So really, all we do as photographers is draw with light. So if I was to say anything, it would be that just the overcomplication of things is incredible to me. Look at what's important first. Where's the most important thing? Light before everything. Light before pose, light before composition, light before exposure, light before everything. So find the best light. Once we've got the best light, we look at pose. Once we've got the best pose for that light, then we look at composition. Once we got the best composition for that pose for that light, then we look at exposure. So just step it out. Just make it easy for yourself. Don't overcomplicate it. And life should be pretty good.
I love it. Ryan, you have inspired a lot of people through your photographs that you've created. Is there anywhere where you get your inspiration?
Yeah, art galleries.
Art galleries. I love it. Nice and simple. Perfect way to end this. Ryan, man, geez, thank you so much for coming on. You shared a ton of great information and wonderful tips there. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you online and find out more about your work?
Of course. I'm probably more active on Instagram rather than anything else. So if you search just the handle Ryan Schembri on Instagram, there's a couple of Ryan Schembris in the world, in fact.
I was really surprised, in fact.
Yeah. It's just funny. Schembri is a Maltese name, and Schembri in Malta is quite common. But I didn't think there were too many Ryans, because Ryan's an Irish name. So anyway, so Ryan Schembri, you'll find me on there. I think I'm the only one who's a wedding photographer. So look for the one with all the wedding photographs. That's probably me. I'm obviously also on Facebook. And I'm pretty active in terms of if you do ask me a question, then I want to get back to you. The only thing I'll ask is maybe just give me a smidgen more time on the weekends, because I'm usually out shooting weddings. But love to have you along if you had any questions at all. Just let me know. So.
Right on, man. Ryan, again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I really look forward to keeping up with you and your work.
Pleasure, mate. Thank you so much.
You know what I want each and every one of you to do right now? I don't care if you're driving, pull over to the side of the road. I don't care if you're at the gym, hit that giant stop button on the treadmill. If you're feeding your kids, just throw the SpaghettiOs on the floor, and this is what you got to do. This is what I'm asking you to do right now, because I hope that you are feeling just pumped about that interview, and that you picked up one small piece of information that is really going to change the course of how you operate as a photographer and how you're going to shoot your next session. So here's what I want you to do. First, I want you to go, I love Instagram. Instagram is probably one of my favorite social networks. I want you to go on Instagram, and I want you to go on your Instagram stories, and I want you to take a picture of yourself, just like giving a fist pump, like, yeah, this is awesome, I'm excited for this, and tell me your biggest takeaway, whatever it was, whether it was from the lighting tips to the posing to where you want your brides to look and how you want to interact with them to whatever it is. I want you to put that in your Instagram story, and then I want you to tag me at rhatfieldphoto. That's all one word, okay? all lowercase. I actually don't think that matters. R as in Raymond. I'm Raymond. Hatfield, that's my last name. Photo. Not photography, photo. Photography was too long. R Hatfield Photo. You can see it right here. If you're watching on YouTube, my logo right there. R Hatfield Photo on Instagram. Give me a quick Instagram story. Or post a picture on Instagram, whatever you want to do, tag me in it. I would love to know what your biggest takeaway was. And I want to interact with you more on Instagram. I want to build this this community up, all right? So don't just let this podcast go and be like, wow, that was a really good interview, and then just forget about it, because here's what I'm going to do. If you post an Instagram story, tag me in it, telling me what your biggest takeaway is and what you're going to implement next time you pick up the camera, I'm going to personally make sure that you do that. I'm going to keep tabs on you and make sure that you follow through with this, because there's no point in listening to this podcast, getting all of this photography knowledge, and then just doing nothing about it. So I'm going to be your personal coach for this one thing, all right? Tell me what it is that your biggest takeaway was, and I'm going to make sure that you are going to achieve it. That's it. Education is everything. You can know enough to be a six-figure photographer or be a world-class photographer, but you don't know everything about photography. And I hope that even if you are proficient in, or maybe you have a photography business or something, I still hope that you took something away from this interview and every other interview I do. And again, if you did, let me know on Instagram. Let's be friends. I'm going to hold your hand and make sure that you become a better photographer this next week. All right, guys, that's all that I want to talk about. I just want to tell you all that I truly appreciate you for listening. And aside from leaving a review, the next biggest compliment that you can give me is letting a friend know about this podcast. If you know any other photographers, just share that link. Within iTunes, I think that there's a share button. You can say, hey, friend who's also in photography, have you checked out this podcast? That's all that I ask. It really does help grow this podcast and lets me continue to deliver content that you find helpful. And I truly enjoy this. I want to stick with this. So, guys, I cannot wait for these Instagram stories to be rolling in. Don't let this one go. I'm serious. I really want to be there to help you out. Let's do this together. Let's grow and become better together. All right, guys. So get out there. Take something that you learned this week. Get out there. Start shooting. I really want you to enjoy what you're doing. Ultimately, you need to be safe. And I will see you again next week. I love you all.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Be sure to join the conversations on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want any links or resources we talked about in today's episode, check out the show notes at beginnerphotographypodcast.com. See you again next week.